morning. It's Dr. Driver here. Hope you can hear me. This is my lecture on the history of the Bible in England. Prior to the early modern or Renaissance period, Bibles or portions of the Bible circulated in manuscript. Manuscript means handwritten. Manu, hand, script, written. Cædmon is the first English poet whose name we know. Hold on, I'm going to put this on slideshow. Okay, where's this thing? From the beginning. Okay, great. Cædmon is the first English poet we know, whose name we know. He lived at the Abbey of Whitby, which was a double monastic house. Back in the early period, in the Anglo-Saxon period of England, men and women religious would live often in the same convent or monastery. Whitby was overseen by the Abbess Hilda. Anyway, Cædmon lived in the Abbey at Whitby, presided over by the Abbess Hilda in the 7th century. So he's a 7th century poet, the earliest poet we know in England by name. According to the story, Cædmon was a herdsman that lives in the monastery, but he's not a monk, he's not a brother, he's not religious, he's a lay person. The evening entertainment at dinner consisted of harp playing and singing or recitation. The story says that the harp passed to each person at the table, but when it was Cædmon's turn, he gets up and goes to the cattle shed, where a voice, often seen as an angel, a voice asks him to sing. Cædmon says he can't sing, but the voice, or angel, says, "Sing something for me." And Cædmon then sings a hymn of creation, usually called Cædmon's Hymn, that begins, "Now shall we praise the guardian of heaven." In Anglo-Saxon, the earliest form of English, the hymn begins, "Nu schulden Herrenjan, heaven reaches weird." And I've posted a version of this that you can listen to on Blackboard. The story goes on to say that Cædmon made many verses from the Bible stories he was told. So he's a kind of a reshaper in Anglo-Saxon of Bible stories, which were written at the time in Latin. So he is composing his work in English. The Venerable Bede, who lived from about 673 to 735, writes about Cædmon, which is why we know about him, in his famous work, The History of the English Church and People, in Latin, Historia Ecclesiastica Gentis Anglorum. This work was composed in the 8th century. And it discusses really the conversion of the pagan English to Christianity. You might wonder what he's doing there, actually. He's got a quill pen. That other thing is his knife, and he's using that to erase any mistakes he makes on the vellum pages. Books were originally written on leather, on vellum, rather than on paper. In any case, getting back to Bede, the British Library has a manuscript of Bede's text that was made in the mid-8th to early 9th century in Bede's own monastery of Wearmouth Jarrow. About Cædmon's story and about Cædmon's story of storytelling abilities, Bede says this, that Cædmon chewed over the Bible stories in his mind like a clean animal chews the cud. Like a clean animal chews the cud. That's a reference to a cow with its 3 stomachs, chewing and redigesting food, and then regurgitating, at least in Cædmon's case, beautiful poetry. Caedmon was said by Bede, when he tells Caedmon's story, that he chews over Bible stories in his mind like a clean animal chews the cud before spitting them forth as poetry. So this is a rather homely farm image of poetic composition. Bede also says that the gift of poetic composition comes from God. Bede himself made an Anglo-Saxon translation of part of the Gospel of St. John in the New Testament. King Alfred the Great was born in 849 and died in 899. He was the son of King Aethelwulf of Wessex and his wife Osburh. Alfred was king of Wessex, which is a part of England, a Saxon kingdom in southwestern England, and defended England from Danish invasion. He also promoted learning and literacy. The first English history, known as the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, was begun during Alfred's reign, about 890. King Alfred circulated a number of passages in the vernacular, and these include parts of the Ten Commandments and the Pentateuch, to which he prefixed a code of laws that he promulgated around this time. So Alfred the Great is really responsible for the beginning of what's called English common law. He was also said to have directed that the book of Psalms in the Bible be translated into Old English. Marie de France, who we'll encounter later, a 12th century woman writer, says that Alfred also translated Aesop's fables into Anglo-Saxon, though we don't have that text anymore. Alfred is best known for his translation of the Lord's Prayer, or the Our Father, in Anglo-Saxon, so that all of his subjects could hear or read it and understand it. And I posted a version of this on Blackboard. In Anglo-Saxon, it goes, Ure Vader, he who eort in heavenum, gehelged be thy name. So that's the opening line, more or less. Our next person who's important in Bible history in England is John Wycliffe. He was a famous and influential 14th century Bible translator working around 1330, or rather born around 1330 in Yorkshire, and he died December 31st, 1384. He was very active with his followers in promoting the reading of the Bible in English. He believed that all people should have access to the Bible in the English vernacular, which was radical for the 14th century. The Roman Catholic Church used a Latin Bible that was restricted really only to the learned and to priests and nuns if they could read Latin. Many of them couldn't by that point. In any case, you would get the Bible readings from your priest on Sunday in Latin, but only those educated in Latin could understand it. Wycliffe's group is called the Wycliffites or the Lollards. The Lollards means, we think it means mumblers, but nobody's really sure. And there are still many Wycliffite Bibles circulating, or not circulating, they're in libraries these days in rare book collections. And you can see what that text says maybe on the left. It says, Jerome saith thus. He's quoting the Vulgate translation by St. Jerome, which was seen as the standard Roman Catholic Bible. And then look at the next bit. You've got that big blue initial. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was at God, and God was the Word. Okay, so that's a kind of important line. It'll come up again. And some of you may recognize where that text is from in the Bible. Obviously, it's the Bible. Wycliffe was originally a priest and a theology professor at Oxford University. In 1382, he completed a translation directly from the Vulgate, which was, as I said, the Orthodox Roman Catholic Bible translated by St. Jerome in the 4th century, so it's 10 centuries earlier. He translates this into Middle English. This is the translation known as Wycliffe's Bible. Wycliffe is making these translations at the same time as Geoffrey Chaucer is writing Canterbury Tales and his Troilus and other works. So they're near contemporaries. And Wycliffe's translations become one basis for later English Bible translation. Wycliffe himself was condemned as a heretic by the Roman Catholic Church, though he dies in England unscathed, unpunished by the Roman Catholic Church, probably because the Roman Catholic Church was situated in Rome. Wycliffe was in England. England was seen as very, very far away, and the church didn't bother with him much at that point. This doesn't become radical thought until a little bit later, really recognized as radical thought, that everyone should be able to read the Bible in their own language. He was condemned as a heretic, though. There's a Wycliffite Bible currently in the New York Public Library that was owned by King Richard II of England, who married Anne of Bohemia, now Czechoslovakia. Richard traveled with his retinue to Bohemia, Czechoslovakia, where Wycliffite Bibles circulated at the university. So he brought the Bibles with him. So Richard II, the King of England, was a kind of promoter of Wycliffite Bibles. The Czechs were thrilled to see a Bible in the vernacular, not in Latin, that could be accessible to everyone. And Jan Hus, a professor in Czechoslovakia, decided to make a Czech translation so everyone in Bohemia could have access to the Bible and decide what it meant for themselves. This is what happens to Jan Hus. Sorry this is so blurry. Here he's shown being burnt at the stake with this little nasty crown on his head. I put a link, if you're interested in him, online on our Blackboard, which is a kind of eyewitness account of his burning at the stake. This was a typical thing that the church did to heretics. Jan Hus was another professor at the University of Prague at this time, very influenced by the Wycliffite translation of the Bible. Like Wycliffe, Hus had revolutionary ideas and anticipated the Protestant Reformation by nearly a century, especially with its emphasis on the primacy of the Bible, or the importance of the Bible to all believing Christians. Like Wycliffe, Hus thought all Christians should have access to and be able to read the Bible in their own language. Hus was born about 1370 in Bohemia, later condemned as a heretic by the Roman Catholic Church and burnt at the stake for his radical ideas in Germany on July 6, 1415. But before he died, he translated many writings by John Wycliffe into Czech, forming the basis for the Czech language. Hus's most popular work in Czech is a tract called Exposition of the Faith, of the Ten Commandments, and of the Lord's Prayer. When he switched from Latin to Czech, he developed a new orthography, that is, new spelling, with simpler rules, and used capitalization, a novelty, using capital letters, hyphenation, and punctuation. So all of these things were new in the Czech language before Hus, when Hus introduces them. His works are considered classics of Czech literature and remain important in the study of the evolution of the Czech language. Now we come to Martin Luther. Martin Luther was yet another priest and professor. He begins as an Augustinian monk. He was a professor at the University of Wittenberg, which is where Hamlet goes to school. Luther comes to believe that the Bible is primary in the Christian understanding of religion. So like these others, Wycliffe and Hus, Luther too believes this. First, Luther, as a good monk, is accused by the church of being a Hussite, a follower of Jan Hus. And he's horrified. He's horrified. And then he realizes that reform of the church is necessary. And again, that every true believer should be able to read the Bible in his or her own language. Luther has a long and complicated career. After making an inflammatory statement at the Diet of Worms in 1521, I know the Diet of Worms is somewhat comical. Worms is actually a city, it's Worms, and the Diet is just like a convocation or a meeting. Okay, so he makes a statement at the Diet of Worms in 1521 about the corruption of the church and was asked to recant his views. But he replied, "Here I stand, I can do no other." So he was a man of integrity. Anyway, after this moment in history, when he's facing almost certain death at the stake like Jan Hus, Luther is kidnapped by his boss, the Elector Frederick of Saxony, the main patron of the University of Wittenberg. Frederick didn't want the church messing with his prize professor, and Martin Luther was apparently a very good professor. So he's kidnapped by the Elector Frederick and held captive in one of Frederick's castles, where Luther translates the New Testament into German, and this comes to be known as the September Testament. The last book of the Bible, the book of Revelation, or the Apocalypse, was exploited by Luther and his followers. Really, it was used as propaganda against the Roman Catholic Church. And here you see the whore of Babylon, who's a character in the Apocalypse, seated on the many-headed beast. And she's wearing the papal tiara. So she's wearing the crown of the Pope. So this is a direct hit at the Pope. And you've got this annotation all around the page making reference to that. I haven't actually, some of these I've actually spent time trying to deconstruct, try to understand what all this gloss is, what all these footnotes, these notes are doing. Look, these notes are even in the picture. Someone's very interested in this picture and commenting on it, a later reader. So Luther's born in 1483, and he dies actually in the city where he was born after going there to give a lecture. His main stomping grounds were Wittenberg, but he goes back home to give a lecture, has a stroke, gives a sermon from his deathbed, and then dies. So he, like Wycliffe, dies in his bed, or in a bed, rather than being burnt at the stake. And he is generally seen, Luther is generally seen as the person who began the Protestant Reformation in Europe. In 1517, Luther is said to have nailed the 95 Theses to the church door at Wittenberg. Some of you may know this. This may be apocryphal. This may not be a true story. The 95 Theses were the 95 criticisms of the church that he had, mainly about the selling of indulgences. Pope Leo used indulgences to raise money for all his projects, including the painting of the Sistine Chapel by that famous artist who you may know, Michelangelo. So indulgences basically were pieces of paper that you would buy that would supposedly guarantee your journey to heaven or get you and your relatives through purgatory. Purgatory in Christianity was seen as a kind of middle state between hell and heaven, though purgatory is not mentioned in the Bible and is essentially an invention of the Roman Catholic Church. So these indulgences would get you more quickly through purgatory. You could also buy them for your friends, and they had prayers on them that you were supposed to say. It was a little like holy cards, I guess. Anyway, Luther saw this as exploitative, and that was where all that trouble began, or the Protestant Reformation, however you want to look at it. Um, so, yeah, Luther notes that purgatory does not appear in any Bible and was a fabrication of the Roman Catholic Church. This is a very dramatic woodcut by Albrecht Dürer of the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. And you can see them trampling over people here. This was actually made before Luther breaks with the church, but it was seen, a woodcut like this, imagery like this, was used to promote Protestantism during the Reformation period. We do have a monstrous fanged creature that's gnawing on the mitre of a bishop here someplace. Wonder where that is. Well, maybe you can find it, which is seen as commentary on the corruption of the church at the time. Moving on, William Tyndale, here we go again. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. And there we see it's from the Gospel of St. John. This comes from a 1520s New Testament translated by William Tyndale. William Tyndale became one of Martin Luther's most zealous followers. He thought of making a new vernacular translation of the Bible so that his friends and fellow Christians could read it in English. The general response to this in England was hostile. So Tyndale went off to Germany in 1524, and there at Cologne, he published his English version of the New Testament in 1525. He was almost captured by Roman Catholic officials in Cologne, but escaped to Worms. You've heard that name before, Worms, which is spelled worms, where he completed the Cologne edition, which was then smuggled into England. This is another page from a Tyndale Bible. Tyndale quickly followed his first edition of the New Testament in English with another, also smuggled into England for Protestants to read. Notice this woodcut has been painted, so this book has been well cared for. It has some hand interventions, though the text itself is printed in some begats, isn't it? You've got the begats here, who it's the generation of Jesus Christ, the son of David. So that's what's being described there. Let's see. Yes, so he produces this in 1526 for Protestants. Protestantism is still seen as heresy in England, and this is before Henry VIII, that king with the 6 wives, whom you may remember, wants his divorce from Catherine of Aragon. He too will break with the church, but possibly not for religious reasons. The fact that Tyndale's books were promptly confiscated by English authorities made them much more popular among readers. The authorities were led by the Archbishop Thomas Wolsey, a rather corrupt man who rose to power in the early part of Henry VIII's reign, had a mistress, had some illegitimate children, but a great churchman. Nonetheless, Roman Catholic. Okay. Anyway, Tyndale becomes all the rage in England because these are smuggled books. These are underground books. In 1530, at Antwerp, Tyndale published his English version of the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, and the next year, his translation of the story of Jonah. Meanwhile, Richard Bayfield and other zealous English reformers tried to meet the large but surreptitious demand among English Lutherans for Tyndale's Worms New Testament by smuggling at least 3 reprints into England, and in 1534 issued a somewhat altered edition of Tyndale. I'm sorry, this picture's cut off a little bit, but this is the 1534 title page. This is what happens to Tyndale, another burning at the stake. Oh dear. In 1534, Tyndale supervised the publication of a new English Bible edition in Antwerp, which included controversial and heretical, that is anti-church, prologues to the Bible books, and inflammatory marginal glosses or notes in the text. before his execution for heresy by the Roman Catholic Church in 1536 near Vilvoorde, near Brussels, burning at the stake, Tyndale managed to get further editions of the English Bible into print, which were published in 1535 and 1536. So this was a man on a mission. William Tyndale's goal was to circulate the Bible as widely as he could in English translation. Tyndale is credited, along with John Wycliffe, but more importantly, Tyndale, as doing more towards shaping the text of the King James Version, the KJV, King James Version, still in use today, of 1611 than any other translator. Working from Hebrew and Greek texts, Tyndale also consulted Desiderius Erasmus's Latin and Luther's German versions. Erasmus was a good Catholic, actually, who translates the Bible and thinks he's got a better version than Jerome, but actually the church didn't like Erasmus's translation very much either, and censored parts of it, would allow people to read bits of it, but not the whole thing. Tyndale wished to render the scripture in both faithful and idiomatic English so that all could understand. His translation serves as the main basis for the King James Bible in English almost a century later. Enter Miles Coverdale. Miles Coverdale, who, like Luther, was a former Augustinian monk, later becomes the Bishop of Exeter in England and converts to Protestantism. This Bible was compiled by him and translated a complete Bible version, which was printed probably in Zurich, not in England. England's still a hot spot, in 1535. Henry's getting restless now, Henry VIII. In 1532, Henry VIII breaks with Rome over his divorce. He demands in Parliament that all members of the Church of England recognize him as the supreme head of the English Church and nation. That's not passed until 1534, but things are still a little uncomfortable in England. He finally does marry Anne Boleyn. But you could see Henry right down here at the bottom. I'm sorry this is cut off. This is Henry seated on his throne, giving the Coverdale Bible and these little scrolls, which you can hardly see at all because it's cut off, to the people so that people can read the Bible in English. So we're on the boundaries really of what's safe in England. But here we go again. I've got another picture of this. That's not a very good picture, is it? Thought it looked better when I pulled it offline. Here's Henry again giving the scripture to various ministers in the bottom. So this was seen as sort of a way to emphasize that Henry was now the supreme head of the church. This is a second edition, printed in 1537. And this edition also says it was printed by the King's gracious license. So now the king is accepting the idea that the Bible can circulate in English. Another English Bible version is the Matthew Bible. It's attributed to someone called Thomas Matthew, who may be fictional. It's printed in 1537, as you see. If your Roman numerals are good, you see that on the screen. This may be a version produced by the Protestant John Rogers, who may even be an ancestor of mine, John Rogers. It's called the Thomas Matthew Bible, the Matthew Bible. And you see his name actually there on the title page. Nobody knows who he is. This was put together using both the Tyndale and Coverdale Bible versions. It was also printed at the King's gracious license. So the king seems to have approved this. And then this Bible is later plagiarized by the printer-translator Richard Taverner. So there are a bunch of little Bibles that are, well, not little, large folio-sized Bibles that are being issued before the real official one comes out, which is this one, the Great Bible. Now here you can see Henry. Henry's up in the top, above the title page, above the title there, the Bible in English. He's sitting up there on his throne, and he's giving texts in the form of scrolls and books to his followers so that all the English people can read the Bible. So it's called the Great Bible because it's enormous. It's an enormous folio version. Folio is usually a much larger book than a quarto, but we'll talk about that too eventually. Anyway, this is a folio version of the Bible that was produced with Henry's blessing in 1539. As early as 1530, Henry had formed a committee to investigate the possibility of a Bible version as an official vernacular version, but Henry lost interest. So Henry doesn't seem to have had a very long attention span. Again, attested to by his 6 wives, he seems to lose interest in books and wives fairly quickly. However, Thomas Cromwell, who was the hero of Hilary Mantel's Wolf Hall, if you know that story or know that play, Cromwell was a great administrator and lawyer and eventually the chief minister of the Tudor court under Henry, and he was enormously influential in promoting the Protestant cause. He was a true believer in Protestantism, and he worked with Thomas Cranmer, the Protestant Archbishop of Canterbury, to produce an English language Bible, this Bible, the Great Bible. Because Paris was thought to be the center of European printing, and printers in Paris produced the most elegant volumes, not the poor English printers who were slaving away, but the Paris printers, snobbery already. So in Paris, they thought they'd get their Bible published there because they would get a better book. So the Great Bible begins in Paris. Cromwell sent Thomas Cranmer and the printer Thomas Grafton to oversee the work of the great French printer Francis Regnault, who was well known, produced beautiful books actually. He was hired to do the job. So it's a Parisian printer. Paris is the place where this English Bible is going to be printed. But the authorities in Paris got wind of this. Paris is still Catholic. So what happens next? Here's another copy of the Great Bible. It's a little bit blurry, sorry. What happens next is that the Catholic authorities attempt to seize the press and seize all the work of the press and condemn it as heretical. But some of the print work had already been done. And there's a story, and I think it's just a story. I'm not really sure if it's just a story. There's a story that the pages of the Great Bible were smuggled across the English Channel in hats. You heard me, hats, where the work was completed in London in April 1539. So some of these pages may have been published in Paris, smuggled across the Channel, and the book was continued and finished in England, but begun in Paris. The frontispiece or title page of this volume again shows Henry. You see that picture at the bottom, it's blurry. That's Henry on his throne, giving the word of God to Cromwell and Cranmer for them to relay to the English people. The second edition of 1540 of the 7 editions that followed of the Great Bible is sometimes called Cranmer's Bible for the long preface that Thomas Cranmer, Archbishop of Canterbury, contributed to it. Later in his rule, Henry VIII banned all Tyndale Bible versions, that was in 1543, and Coverdale's version in 1549. So he just banned all the other earlier editions, and the Great Bible was the only Bible you could have. Under the law, the Great Bible was the legal text for Christians to read. Be right back. Shall we continue? This is a copy of the Geneva Bible. There were 1 or 2 Bibles produced after that during the Marian persecution of Protestants. And you may remember Queen Mary, sometimes called Bloody Mary for her really murderous persecution of Protestants. She's the first daughter of Henry VIII, the daughter of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon, and she rules after the death of her younger brother, Edward. Thomas Cranmer, the Archbishop of Canterbury, is sent to the stake in this period for heresy. So if you're a Protestant, you better shift pretty quickly under Mary. There was one Protestant Bible produced in Geneva that had a preface by John Calvin, who was an extreme Protestant reformer. And in 1560, this was superseded by the famous Geneva Bible, which you see here. This version drew on Tyndale's New Testament and upon the latest Greek and Hebrew scholarship. This became the Bible of the English Puritans. So the Puritans, remember them? They're the ones, the pilgrims who come to America. The Puritan Bible was the Geneva Bible. And there are 150 editions of this Bible produced between 1560 and 1644. Now this is a slightly better picture. This is the Bishop's Bible. And who is this being crowned on the title page? Why, it's none other than Elizabeth I. So here we see Elizabeth I on the title page of the Holy Bible being crowned by fortitude, justice, mercy, prudence. She's being surrounded by the virtues. So the Bishop's Bible was published as a check to the extreme Protestantism, the Puritanism, really, of the Geneva edition. Archbishop Matthew Parker, a great collector of antiquities and promoter of Protestantism, oversaw the project in the reign of Elizabeth I, the second daughter of Henry VIII, and one of the great rulers, the greatest ruler probably ever in England. This Bible, the Bishop's Bible, was published as a sumptuous folio in 1568 and features a woodcut which has been painted here, painted over. So it's a woodcut that's been painted of Elizabeth I. So keep that in mind. The Rems Douay Bible is the Catholic answer to the Protestant Bible, and it was originally published on the continent in Reims, which is why it gets that name, in France in 1582, and it's printed up through about 1635, both on the continent and later in England. Elizabeth is much more open to Catholicism, and she believed in something called Via Media, which is the middle way. So she accepted Catholics in England. They didn't have as many rights as people who were Protestant, but Catholics were allowed to be back in England. And there's a I'm not sure that the picture's right. Oh dear. I'll have to come back to this, but the Reims Douay Bible is, this one's published in England. It's published first in France. It's a Catholic Bible, and it has all these little notes in it that mostly are giving you information, rebutting some of the material that was in the more radical of the earlier English. The notes look right. Earlier English Protestant polemic, the anti-Catholic material that you get in some of the notes in the earlier Bibles. So this work, the Reims Douay Bible, oh, it does say Reims on it. Good. It's making me feel better. Yes, the vulgar Latin of the Papists. Translated the vulgar Latin of the Papists, blah, 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 at Reims, yada, yada, yada. Okay. So the Reims Douay Bible is the Catholic response to the Protestant Bible. Okay, coming to the King James Bible now. This is the last and the greatest of Renaissance Bibles. It was the so-called King James Version, initiated by James I, who is the ruler after the death of Elizabeth I. This is a revision of the Bishop's Bible of 1568, which was a revision of Henry VIII's Great Bible of 1539. This translation was made by a committee consisting of 54 scholars and clergymen. The King James Bible was appointed to be read in all churches in 1611. The translators, who represented both the Anglican and the Puritan wings, you had everybody from extreme radical Protestants to much more middle of the road Protestants to Protestants who were practically Catholic, working on the Bible together, the Anglican and the Puritan wings of the church. And these were the academic and scholarly peers of the realm. In spite of some errors in translation and anachronisms, this work has remained the most influential and monumental work of English prose. Its phrases, its rhythms, and the beauty of its poetry have influenced generations of writers. So the King James Bible is the one to turn to. We use the Revised King James more often today. We've still got this church. This is still a church Bible. This is still a Bible. This is the Bible you find in most churches, the King James Bible. And then I have a few minutes now just to discuss some funny things that happen with Bible printing. Here's the Breeches Bible. This is a variation on the Geneva Bible. The Breeches Bible describes Adam and Eve in the book of Genesis chapter 3, verse 7, this way. Then the eyes of them were opened, and they knew they were naked, and they sewed fig tree leaves together and made themselves breeches. Breeches are trousers, pants. So there they are, running around the Garden of Eden, having eaten of the forbidden tree of the knowledge of good and evil. They realize they have no clothes on, and so they make themselves pairs of pants out of fig leaves. So this is seen as rather comical. You get other funny things in these early translations of Bibles too, other funny linguistic uses. But this one's a famous one, the Breeches reference, and this occurs in the Breeches Bible. Right, so here's another one. You've got the text here at 7. They sewed fig tree leaves together and made themselves breeches. Okay. And then we have the Wicked Bible. This is a bad typo. I'm sure you've all made typos, and so did the early printers. This one is a Lulu. In the 10 Commandments, Christians are advised to commit adultery. So you've got the 10 Commandments: honor thy father and mother, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt commit adultery, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness. This error occurs in an edition of the Bible published in 1631 by Robert Barker and Martin Lucas, the royal printers in London, who probably should have proofread better, and was supposed to be a reprint of the King James Bible. It's usually called the Wicked Bible. So here ends the brief disquisition on the publication history of the Bible. Be sure to have any questions ready for our next Zoom class and take the quiz. You can take the quiz only 3 times this time, and the system will keep your highest grade. Good luck!